Okay, so I feel like I need to say right out of the gate that after rewatching this episode, I'm actually a little disappointed with it. Which is not to say that this episode doesn't have a lot of good stuff in it, because it does. It's just, after rewatching the last one, I was sure that I remembered this episode. I don't think I mentioned it in the review, but I left my viewing of part 2 thinking, oh well, I definitely remember part 3 now. And I definitely could have been more wrong, because I did remember some parts of this episode really well. It's the Raven parts. I remembered the Raven parts really well. But there was stuff about this episode that I had completely forgotten, and I am fairly certain that that was entirely on purpose. I wholeheartedly believe that I forgot some parts of this episode willfully. Like, there's Slade stuff in this episode that I'll talk about a little bit in a little while, because I don't want to talk about it at all. And man, I'm 100% sure I blocked that out because I hated that. Like, I like Slade as a villain in this show. I really liked him during his, like, main villain arcs. If you count the Terra arc as a villain arc for Slade also, I guess. It would be arcs, right? But I've been kind of dancing around it lately. I don't like him since then. I haven't liked him since then. Like, he's been fine. He's served a purpose in the show. But I've been trying to justify to myself why he needs to be here. And put simply, that's because I don't care about cartoon Slade. Like, Slade's comic book counterpart, he's not called Slade in the comics, but Slade's comic book counterpart, I care about that guy. Because he's not, like, the worst guy ever. And he has a history with the team, or at least he did. I don't know if current Slade does, because they've rebooted a couple times since then. But he has a history with the team that's not purely antagonistic. He's an entertaining guy to read about. His backstory is interesting. His dynamic with the Titans is interesting. And I alluded to this a little bit in the last review, that he becomes kind of a Titan. Kind of, not really, but kind of a Titan in the comics. And he doesn't in this. He's just a villain in this. And so when he's not doing interesting villain stuff, I just don't care about him. And so I've kind of had this inkling that I was going to reach a point where I just didn't want to see any more of this guy ever again in the show. And this was that point. This episode was that point. My repressed memories were trying to warn me of its coming. But we'll get to that when we get to it. I am going to talk about it specifically later on in the review. And it didn't ruin the episode for me or anything. I use the word hate sometimes to play up my reactions for comedic effect when I'm doing a review. Usually I'm just annoyed with something or like mildly dislike it. But I mean it this time, definitionally. I hated the Slade stuff in this episode, and I am going to explain to you why. But first, the episode opens on a continuation of the Titans versus Evil Titans fights from part 2. I might as well just talk about those in their entirety and get them out of the way. First, because they were interesting, and they did make up a large chunk of this episode's runtime. And this is an aspect of the episode that I didn't remember. I didn't even think I remembered it after watching the last episode. I'm like, I don't remember how the fights against the Evil Titans resolved. That'll be fun to see. Right? I remember thinking that. I didn't mention it, but I remember thinking that. And going into it, I was kind of hoping that since the Evil Titans are made from the darker aspects of the real ones, that we'd get some interesting character moments, and the real Titans would have to acknowledge some of their, I don't know, like insecurities or whatever, ones that they never talk about, ones that they don't even like to think about, ones that what might have carried over into those dark doppelgangers, and turn the tables and get under the skin of the Evil Titans the same way that the Evil Titans were getting under their skin last time, and that they defeat them that way. But instead they just shuffle up each other's opponents. And that's not bad. It's a clever way to deal with a situation like this. It's tried and true. They've even done it in Power Rangers. And I can certainly buy, like Starfire fights Evil Cyborg and Cyborg fights Evil Beast Boy. And I can buy Starfire beating Cyborg and Cyborg beating Beast Boy. What I can't buy, and this is no offense to Beast Boy, I like Beast Boy a lot, and he's powerful. I cannot buy Beast Boy defeating Starfire. I'm sorry, straight up, I don't buy it. I don't buy what this episode is trying to sell me. Like, he beats her by doing T-Rex suplex on her, and then dropping a big rock. And I'm sorry, I don't believe that either one of those things, or even those two things back to back, would be lethal to Starfire. Especially when we saw Starfire tear evil Cyborg apart. But Cyborg was completely immune to damage from evil Beast Boy. Like, the show treats it kind of like a rock, paper, scissors kind of thing, where Starfire beats Cyborg, and Cyborg beats Beast Boy, and Beast Boy beats Starfire, but it's not. Beast Boy doesn't have any special advantage over Starfire that allows him to win. He would have to rely on brute force, and I don't believe he output enough brute force to do that. And I don't understand why he had to. Like, I get wanting all of your characters in a team-up show to appear equally useful to the team, but, and I've mentioned this before, the right way to do that is by showing them being useful in different ways. In making use of their unique abilities be useful in different ways. And I definitely buy Beast Boy dodging evil Starfire long enough for the other two to beat the other two, and then all three of them can gang up on her. So why couldn't they just acknowledge that Beast Boy is not powerful enough to beat Starfire and work that into their strategy? Have him say something like, I can't beat you, Star. And they're like, it's okay, there's something you can do. And then cut away, and we see him just evade her the whole time until Cyborg and real Starfire can come in clutch and beat her down, right? I don't understand why that couldn't have happened. It would have taken just as much time if they had used their time wisely. Still, these fights remain entertaining. Sometimes an action sequence doesn't need to have like an emotional core to it. You don't need to learn anything about the characters from it. Sometimes an action sequence is fun just because it's an action sequence. And I don't care what people say. That is true. Sometimes action sequences can just be action sequences. And this is a good action sequence. And it's during it that we learn that Trigon knows what Robin is trying to do. He's known this entire time. He's just been playing with them. Because of course he has. Like, the whole plan was to try to distract an omnipotent being. But omnipotent is like infinity. If you pull a chunk out of infinity, what's left is still infinity, right? He just doesn't care. Because while he recognizes that some part of Raven might still exist, he doesn't believe she's a threat. He is 100% sure that she is not a threat. Because he fundamentally misunderstands who she is. He believes that she is just the portal, just the vessel for his rise. He doesn't see her as a person with her own agency, and that's what is his eventual downfall. Because Robin does find her, as we saw at the end of the last episode, and after getting her to trust him, because she doesn't remember who he is yet, he puts her on his back and starts to climb up out of not hell with her on his back. And as he's doing so, he tells her their story. Like, we only hear a snippet of it, because we don't need the entire series exposited to us or anything. But it's clear that that's what he's been doing the entire time. And I love that as a plot point, especially with what's coming up. Because he's telling the story of how she has saved people, how she used to use her powers for the greater good, despite who she always believed herself to be, the vessel for ultimate evil. And it is thanks to him telling her those stories that she comes to realize that she does remember. It feels like a dream to her, like something that she didn't actually live, but she does remember. And yet she still needs a bit of prodding to believe that Trigon is someone they can stand up to. Because the thing that she remembers most strongly is that Trigon can't be stopped. And yet after Robin gets her back to the surface, and the evil titans have been defeated, and Trigon is now focusing on our heroes directly, and the ring that protected them has been destroyed, so now he can affect them with his powers. When Raven sees the titans fighting back against Trigon and actually managing to damage him, against all odds, she finds her hope again. And she remembers those stories that Robin told her, and she remembers her past. And the episode doesn't come right out and say it, and there may be another explanation for why this happened, but I like to think my explanation is the correct one because it's better, I think. But she finds her power again, not through Trigon, but through her bond with her real family. And that's what it really comes down to, and she says it outright in the episode. Trigon calls himself her father, but she declares that she does not see him as a father because he was never a father to her. It was the monks who were her family, and, more importantly in the moment, her friends. And it ties back into the underlying theme of an abusive family dynamic that's been the undercurrent of this entire arc. All that Trigon ever did was have a hand in creating Raven and then make her life miserable. She owes him nothing, and ultimately she has the power to banish him again. And I think that is what's implied to have happened here. I don't think she destroyed him, because we see that the same spell that makes him disappear also undoes the magic that accompanied his arrival. So I think what she did is just sealed him away again. I don't know if they ever confirmed that anywhere, but that's what I took away from the scene. But it doesn't matter now, either way, because if he is sealed away inside of her again, it's not because he wanted to be. It's because she put him there. To stretch the analogy, she took the trauma that he hoisted upon her, and she came to terms with it and made it a part of herself in a healthy way, rather than a harmful one. And, in universe, there's no longer a prophecy that'll turn her back into a portal and allow him to rise again. So I think we're good, right? He's defeated, and that's really what matters, right? It's just such a powerful scene that conveys the message of that undercurrent to this arc in a way that doesn't have to spell it out. Like, yeah, Raven gets a little literal there for a little bit, but she doesn't come right out and say, you are an abusive father figure and I don't owe you anything. It's just heavily implied. But it's implied loudly enough that it still carries meaning. I like it a lot, and that scene between her and Trigon is, in my opinion anyway, the strongest scene in the show up to this point. It might be the strongest scene overall for me. We'll have to see. We are going to be starting the final season of this show relatively soon. And if that had been all of it, if that had been the episode, it would have lived up to my expectations. But there had to be Slade stuff in this episode. They couldn't have just left the Slade stuff on the, I thought, cool, ambiguous note that they seemed to be leaving it on last episode. They had to bring him back into this stinking episode and foul everything up. We had to see him score an even more improbable win than Beast Boy against Starfire, blowing up a guy with a bomb who had just been dropped in lava and survived. And just as I don't believe that dropping a rock on Starfire would kill Starfire, I don't believe that a bomb would kill a guy who can survive being submerged in lava. We have to see him get his life back, and then steal a magic weapon and show up and use it to harm Trigon, implying that it's only because he harmed Trigon to begin with that the Titans were able to harm him as the battle continued. Like, I want to reiterate, I do know that Slade becomes an ally to the Titans for a while in the comics. That in the context of those comics, maybe it would make sense for him to be standing here with Raven's found family during her big moment. But that's not who he is in this show. He didn't deserve to be a part of this scene. And I detest that he was. I hate it so much. It leaves a taint on what would otherwise be pretty much a perfect episode. Like, I'd still have some nitpicks. The thing with Beast Boy and Evil Starfire would still be a nitpick. But I don't condemn stories based on nitpicks. I'm not going to condemn this story based on the Slade stuff either, because the rest of it was good enough to elevate it beyond that. But man, it drug this one down for me a lot. Like, let's put it this way. It is a testament to how good the rest of this episode was. Like good to great the rest of this episode was, that I love it as much as I do in spite of the Slade stuff. Still, either way, this was a perfect wrap-up to Raven's arc. Even the very end where she talks with Robin and he has to explain to her how hopeful she is, because while she has had hope all this time, she's always been so convinced of her fate that she didn't even recognize that that's what it was. Like even that conversation really worked for me, because it shows how these people, this found family of hers, completes her and draws out the best in her. Stuff that she wouldn't recognize without them to reflect off of. Like we saw in parts 1 and 2, with her starting to believe that maybe they could fight back against Trigon, the creation of Trigon's portal in part 1, and how she was able to use some of her power to leave the Titans of Fighting Chains in part 2. She did have hope. She did believe that they could do something. She just wasn't able to articulate it to herself until she talked to Robin here at the end. It's all really, really good and makes for a fantastic season and finale of what is already a fantastic show, generally speaking. And I gotta say, while I really enjoyed revisiting this arc, I enjoyed it a lot, even more than I actually expected that I would. Again, generally speaking, the Slade stuff here at the end still pissed me off a little bit, but I'm going to stop harping on that now. I am, and I think I mentioned this last time too, or a couple of reviews ago or something. I'm really looking forward to getting into Season 5. I revisited a lot of earlier episodes, back when this show was in syndication. Like mostly Season 1 and 2 stuff. And I know I've seen every episode of the Raven arc more than a couple of times now that I've rewatched them for the reviews. But I don't think I've seen a single episode of Season 5 more than once. So revisiting Season 5, having already analyzed the rest of the show in these reviews leading up to it, is going to be a treat. One that I'm very much looking forward to. As per usual, though, I'd like to know, what did you think of The End Part 3 if you have seen it? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, if you could, please like the video and share it with anyone else you think might enjoy my content. Subscribe if you haven't. I'm trying to get myself out there, and I'd really appreciate it if you guys could help. You can also check out my social medias. Links to those will be in the video description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.